last video, we left off talking about the chemistry of life and how we start off with these things called atoms. They are the smallest unit of matter, and then we can take atoms and put them together into what we call molecules, specifically for biology, or I should say a molecule is two or more atoms that are bonded together. Specifically for biology, we are concerned with only 6 elements out of the periodic table of elements. So those 6 elements are sulfur, phosphorus, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon, and hydrogen. They make an acronym that spells out SPONGE. And today what we're going to be doing is looking at something that is called a macromolecule. Please load. Cool. So at this point, if we refer back to our root words, we know that the prefix macro means big or large, and a molecule is 2 or more atoms that are bonded together. So in this case, we're looking at really, really, really large molecules. And specifically, we're looking at 4 different types of macromolecules. So they are going to be carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Now, hopefully what you'll notice from these pictures right here are they are all pictures of different types of food. So as you know, we are making our way to the digestive system that involves the food that we eat and how it comes out of our body as poop. And so now we're starting to look at the chemistry of the food that we eat. So carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins are all macromolecules that make up all of the food that we consume, all of the food that we eat. Nucleic acids are also found in food. They are slightly different than the other 3 macromolecules, and that's why I'm not showing you a food picture necessarily for them. So over the next couple slides, we are going to be looking at each one of these macromolecules individually. Also, as a reminder, please make sure you have your vocab notebook out ready to go as we go through this presentation. All right, so let's start out with the carbohydrate. Now, the job of the carbohydrate in our bodies, the reason why our bodies use or need carbohydrates are because they are our main source of energy. So in terms of like what our body runs off of, if we need some energy to go do stuff, it's normally coming from carbohydrates. So this is also why you'll see athletes have like a spaghetti or pasta dinner right before a big event. They're trying to store these carbohydrates or store this extra energy in their body to then go use it the next day during their competition. So for a carbohydrate, there are some different types. The main type of carbohydrate you are going to hear about this year is glucose. So if you remember that OSE at the end of a word, that os, means it is a sugar. So glucose is our most basic type of sugar. This is like sugarcane type of sugar. So keep in mind, sugar and carbohydrate are sort of interchangeable. If you see the word sugar, you should be thinking carbohydrate. If you see carbohydrate, you should be thinking sugar. Both are an energy source for the body. So one type of carbohydrate, an example of it is glucose. This is a diagram of that molecule right here. And it is also known as a monosaccharide. So again, from our root words, we should know that mono means 1. Saccharide is talking about sugar. So this is 1 ring of sugar. And as you can see here in the structure, it has this ring-like structure to it, and there's just 1 of them. That's why it's known as a monosaccharide. You'll also notice I'm calling it a monomer. So again, mono means 1. And so down here it tells you a monomer is a molecule that can be bonded to other identical molecules to form a polymer. Poly means many, so then polymer would be a bunch of molecules bonded together. Once that goes away, we shall see it. There it is. A bunch of monomers that have been bonded together. So glucose is an example of a monomer. It is a single ring sugar. It is a monosaccharide. And then down here, if we look at what a polysaccharide is, poly means many, saccharide means sugar. We see many rings of sugar. So we have 4 different rings of sugar. This is a polysaccharide. It is also a polymer because we have bonded many monomers together. Now, in the middle here, we have a disaccharide. Di means 2, so 2 rings of sugar. So here's the first one. Here's the second one. So 2 rings, disaccharide. An example of this is sucrose. It's also fructose, which is the sugar found in fruit. Lactose, the sugar that's found in milk. And then down here, I didn't mention the example, but starch or cellulose are both examples. So in terms of food, okay, like I said, carbohydrates are sugar. There are different types of sugar because I know sugar has like a bad reputation. But in terms of different types of food, yes, we can go straight to sugar. So things like candy or just straight up sugar. Those would be closer to glucose, closer to monosaccharides. I've mentioned before, fruit up here, those would be disaccharides with fructose. Vegetables would also fall under this category. Vegetables will actually have a polysaccharide or a polymer, which is cellulose. And then we have other type of carb sources, so pasta, bread, cookies, brownies, rice, potatoes. Corn is another example of a starch. All of these are different forms of carbohydrates in the food that you eat. So all of these foods you're eating simply for energy, just to give your body enough energy to run. Now, the next type of macromolecule, of course, my face is in the way. There it is. Yes, okay. The next type of macromolecule is what we call a lipid, and you might have heard the term fat being used before. So the common name for this is fat. The science word would be lipid. Now, lipids have a bunch of functions or a bunch of jobs in your body. They can be used for energy storage. So if you have any fat stored on your body, that's essentially energy that's stored up for a rainy day when we possibly go into famine. I'm putting that in quotes because in the modern world, we don't really go into famines. But if for whatever reason, you are going a very long time, I mean days, weeks without food, any fat you have on your body is just stored energy for that type of scenario. And I also want to say that everybody does have fat stored on their body. We all have it. It is a natural thing. We all need it in order to survive. The other thing that lipids will do is hormone regulation. So hormones are these chemicals in our body that send signals between different body systems, within the same body system. Basically, they send messages in our body. And so lipids will help to regulate the process of sending those messages. And again, this is very important for function, for survival, because without these messages being sent, we wouldn't be able to function properly. And then I hinted at this before, but we all have fat on our body. It's just who we are. Like I said, it's natural. This is not me calling anybody fat. It's just, like I said, we have fat on our body. It is stored in many different places. Some people have more fat stored than others. It is perfectly normal. And the reason why we do have fat stored on our body is, number one, for insulation. It helps to keep us nice and warm. Our bodies like to function at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius. So insulation helps to keep us warm. And having that fat, again, helps to keep us warm. If you think about like polar bears or seals, animals that tend to live in the Arctic and very cold environments, they have insulation called blubber. So they have a lot of fat on their body. And that blubber or that fat is meant to help keep them warm in the cold temperatures. We also need fat on our body in certain places for protection. So, for example, we have some fat that is cushioning and insulating all of our organs. And so this will help because let's say like I go up to someone and I punch them in the gut really hard. You have a lot of organs inside your gut area. So that's this area right here. And if I punch you in the wrong place, it could kill you if you don't have that protection there. So it's literally adding just like a little bit of padding if you do get hit in some way, and that way your spleen won't burst if somebody punches you in the spleen. It's there for protection. So there are a couple different types of lipids that we are going to be looking at. Number one is called a saturated fatty acid. And this is going into what we call a hydrocarbon chain. So as you can see in the diagram here, we have a bunch of carbons bonded together in a chain. And then hydro is for hydrogen. So all these H's over here, they are representing the hydrogens. So this is just a really long chain of carbons filled in with a bunch of hydrogens. And what you'll notice is that basically it's just one long chain. That is why it is called a saturated fatty acid. You can also have an unsaturated fatty acid. So it's a very similar concept. The only difference is right in here, there's two lines connecting these two C's. So that's called a double bond. And as you can see, it changes the shape of the molecule. And you'll notice there are less hydrogens in the unsaturated fatty acid compared to the saturated fatty acid. So in our bodies, saturated fatty acid gets the bad reputation. It has like this brick-like structure. It looks like a building block. So it can clog our arteries. They just build on top of each other, brick by brick, until it's clogged, and then you get a heart attack. Unsaturated fatty acids tend to be the healthy fats, and that's because it's harder for them to pile up. What I will say is that both are very healthy and very necessary for survival. You just don't want to have too many of these guys in your body. The last type of lipid we're looking at is called a phospholipid. So this phospho is talking about phosphorus, and lipid, we're talking about a type of lipid or type of fat. And basically, this is the main structure of it. It has what we call a polar head or a hydrophilic head, which means that it likes to interact with water. And then it'll have two hydrophobic tails or two nonpolar tails, which means that it does not like to interact with water. And the reason why these are so important is because this right here will end up making the main structure of your cell membranes. So if you can see in this diagram here, we have the tails pointing in towards each other. The heads are on the outside, pointing either outside the cell or inside the cell. And this is how your cell membrane is actually put together using phospholipids. So a cell membrane is just that outside barrier of the cell, and this is the main structure of it. So 3 different types of lipids right here: saturated fatty acids, unsaturated fatty acids, and phospholipids. Now, let's talk about different foods that are high in lipids. So, butter is definitely one of them. Any type of oil, so olive oil, avocado oil, peanut oil, canola oil, vegetable oil. There's probably a bunch of other types. Oh, coconut oil and coconuts down here. Those are also high in lipid. Avocados are high in lipids. Olives themselves are usually high in lipids. Nuts and seeds will be high in lipids. I'm sure there's other examples out there as well. These are just some of them. So these are foods that are primarily made out of lipids. And so you'll see this type of molecule in it or this type of molecule. All right, so the third macromolecule is protein. And so proteins actually do a whole lot for inside your body. They have a bunch of different jobs, but basically the main job that you can summarize all jobs under would be that they are the building blocks for all the different stuff in your cell. So keep in mind, the cell is the basic functioning unit of life. We are made out of billions upon trillions of cells, and all of the stuff inside of our cells tends to be made out of proteins, different types of proteins. Now, a lot of people will think about protein and think about like muscle and bodybuilding and getting strong. And it definitely is involved in that. It's a very important macromolecule or macronutrient that is involved in that process. And that is because protein will also repair and build body tissue. So if you're trying to build muscle, protein will help you build that body tissue. However, it's also going to help you build and repair your other body tissues as well. So things like skin, hair, nails, any of your other organs, basically anything in your body that needs to be repaired or needs to be made more of, proteins are going to be part of that job. They also coordinate different bodily functions. So again, proteins can be used to send messages in the body. We also have types of proteins called enzymes, which we will be looking at. And they have a very specific job depending on the enzyme to do a very specific task. And so basically proteins are doing all of the stuff inside your body. Now, the main structure of a protein is called an amino acid. And if you put amino acids together, you eventually make a protein. So a single amino acid, its molecular structure is going to look like this. So we have a carbon in the middle here, and towards the left, it's bonded to a nitrogen. That nitrogen is bonded to two hydrogens. That middle carbon is bonded to another hydrogen. And then this R up here is a variable group. So this will change depending on the type of amino acid. On to the right side, that middle carbon is bonded to a second carbon. And then this carbon over here is bonded to both an oxygen and a OH group or hydroxyl group. So this would be the main structure of an amino acid. And then amino acids, you put them together to make proteins. So in terms of different foods, where do you get your protein from? You get it from things like meat, so steak. You get it from poultry, so chicken, turkey. It's found in eggs, tofu as a vegetarian option, fish, basically any animal source of food that you may eat. Of course, you can look into things like protein powders and other sort of like artificially occurring food like that, but the main naturally occurring foods are meats and other types of animal products. So what I will say in terms of food that we eat, protein and lipids are essential for us to survive. So if we are not eating enough lipids or we are not eating enough fats, lipids and fats are the same thing. If we are not eating enough lipids or enough proteins, we will definitely kick the bucket. We will die. You can survive without carbohydrates. It's just not fun. So lipids and proteins are known as essential macromolecules or essential macronutrients. Carbohydrates, you don't need them, but they make life better. So before we move on to the last macromolecule, just to again reiterate the structure of a protein, and we will be going into this in more detail when we talk about protein synthesis and how we express our traits or express our genes and characteristics. The primary structure of a protein is an amino acid chain. So like I said, we take a bunch of amino acids, we put them together, it makes a chain. So each blue circle is meant to represent one amino acid. Once we have that amino acid chain, we get into the secondary structure of a protein. And this is like these patterns here, like it says a folded sheet, or this more like helical shape up here. And once we get it into this shape, they can come together to form a tertiary structure, so the third level of structure. And that's when they start to like wind up on each other until finally they get to sometimes a quaternary structure or the fourth structure where you might put two tertiary structures together. So this is basically just the structure or hierarchy of how proteins are put together. In terms of the MCAS, you are responsible for knowing what an amino acid is and that they make amino acid chains. All right, so the last macromolecule is called nucleic acid, and this one is slightly different. It's not necessarily labeled in food, and I will get to that why in a second. But nucleic acids are the building blocks for DNA and RNA, which is our genetic material. It's our genes. It's our blueprint for who we are. And so in terms of a diagram, for DNA, our basic structure is called a nucleotide. So that is a type of nucleic acid. And that nucleotide will always have what we call a phosphate group, a sugar group, and then a nitrogenous base. So again, we will be coming back to this in more detail when we look at genetics. But what you can do is take this nucleotide, so this basic structure for nucleic acids, we take this nucleotide and we put them together to make things like DNA. So DNA, it stands for deoxyribonucleic acid. Let me say that again one time slower. Deoxyribonucleic acid. That's what DNA stands for. So the D is for deoxyribo, the N is for nucleic, and A for acid. So we take these nucleotides right here, and if you look at this diagram, here is one nucleotide, so phosphate, sugar, nitrogenous base. Here is another nucleotide, phosphate, sugar, nitrogenous base. They bind together in the middle to help start to form DNA. Same thing happens down here, so phosphate, sugar, nitrogenous base, phosphate, sugar, nitrogenous base, they bind together in the middle right here. So when you put enough of these together, you can get this DNA structure, this double helix structure that we're used to seeing for DNA. So just to summarize, DNA is made out of nucleotides. They are all considered nucleic acid. Now, in terms of food, anything that has DNA or once had DNA is going to have nucleic acids in it, because it has DNA. So this is fruits, vegetables, animals, and animal products. Basically any sort of naturally occurring food source out there. Also, for a lot of like chips, chips will probably have nucleic acid in there as well. Chips are usually made from potatoes or corn. Both of those are vegetables, so those will all have DNA inside of them. But that is the basic for nucleic acid. All right, so we are going to pause here again. Please make sure you check your vocab notebook and that you have completed all of the different slides for each macromolecule. And I will see you in the next video.